Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Time for our next math lesson. This is lesson 1.4, so please write that in the top of your math journal, comparing fractions. And then I want you to write down the I can statement you see there. I can use a variety of strategies to compare fractions. I will try to keep this lesson as brief as possible, but there's a lot in here. This is one you may need to watch a couple times, maybe even 3 times before you really can get through all of it and understand it well. Again, if you need to take notes, please do that. So to start with today, we're going to start by comparing fractions with like denominators. Okay, and we're going to focus in on the greater than, less than symbol. Just know equals can be one of them. All right. Now, let's look at 3/5 and 4/5. The denominators are the same. So all we have to do in this case is compare the numerators. You can see straight away that 3 is less than 4. Okay. Another way to think about that, just to kind of wrap your mind around, is we can compare them with unit fractions. Okay, so when we talk about 3/5, how many fifths does it take to make 3/5? Well, it takes 1/5 added together 3 times. When we look at 4/5, you will see the same thing. Okay, so we've got 4/5, we got to add 1/5 together 4 times in that unit fraction. And just remember, unit fractions have a numerator of 1. Okay, so you can see right here that we have 1/5 more on the screen than we did when we were dealing with the 3/5. So therefore, you can look at another way too. Sorry, I jumped a little ahead of myself there. So if you look down here, another way to do this is fraction bars. Okay, so I can compare two same length fraction bars by shading them in. And again, you can see that 4/5 is more than 3/5. So that would be where the greater than symbol faces to the 4/5. So now we're going to move on to comparing fractions with like numerators. So let's take a look at this example. Let's say I've got 2/5 and 2/7. Okay, so as I look at those two fractions, I can see that I have a 2 in both numerator. Now what I should remember when I look at these is that when I'm comparing these, that the fifths have bigger pieces than the sevenths. That's one way to start thinking about that. So you got to remember, if I've got 2 cakes and one's in the same size, and one's cut into 5 slices and one cut into 7 slices, the one with 5 slices is going to be a bigger piece. And since there's 2 of each, I already know that fifths are going to be bigger than sevenths. But I can still use some of those strategies if I'm not sure. Okay, so I can make a fraction bar and divide it into fifths, and I can make a fraction bar and divide it into sevenths, and I can shade those in, and I can see clearly by looking at these that it's obvious that 2/5 is bigger than 2/7 or greater than 2/7. Okay. Another way you may remember from doing this from last year is when we started working with common denominators, which we'll talk a little bit more about as we go on in this lesson. All right, so let's talk about a common denominator. Well, one of the easiest ways to do a common denominator is to multiply the denominator of one fraction against the numerator and denominator of the other. So I'll kind of walk you through that so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so I've got 5 and 7 as my denominators. What I can do then is I can take 2/5 and multiply the numerator and denominator by 7, and that's going to give me a total of 14/35. Okay, and I can also take 2/7 and multiply the numerator and denominator by 5. Okay. Now I've got 10/35. The advantage of doing it this way is now I'm looking at the exact same denominator. And now I can just clearly see, hey, 14 is more than 10. So now that I know that it's 14/35, all I have to do is go back and look at my original fraction, which is 2/5, and I know that that's going to be greater than 2/7. Now let's talk about comparing fractions with unlike denominators. And there's a few methods that we can look at. So let's start with this one. One of them you can do is you can list the first few multiples of each denominator and choose a number that appears on both lists. So let's talk about what that looks like. So we'll start with the denominator 4. So when we talk about multipliers, we're talking about 4 times 1, 4 times 2, 4 times 3, and so on. So I'll list out the first 3, 4, 8, and 12 are the first 4 multiples of 4. 8, its first 3 I think I said 4, I meant 3 multiples. The first 3 multiples of 8 are 8, 16, and 24. Now compare those two lists. What number appears on both? Well, the 8 does. So now I can make 3/4 into 8ths, and I don't have to do anything with 5/8, which is kind of cool. That doesn't always work that way, but 5/8 is right where it needs to be. All I got to do is make this into 8ths. That's going to give me 6/8. So when I go and compare 6/8 to 5/8, it's pretty obvious that 6/8 is more. Okay, because we have those like denominators, and the numerator, the bigger numerator here, is going to be the bigger number. So all I have to do again is remember that 6/8 was 3/4, so that was my original fraction, so therefore 3/4 is greater than 5/8. Now, let's list out the first 3 multiples for 9, which is the denominator in 7/9, and we get 9, 18, and 27, and the first 3 multiples of 6, 6, 12, and 18. And again, I have 18, which can become a common denominator. So I'm going to have to, this time I have to change both fractions. Last time I only had to change one. Okay, so to make 7/9 into 18, I need to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, because 9 times 2 is going to give me 18, and whatever I do to the numerator or denominator, I have to do the numerator too, and vice versa. So that's going to give me 14/18. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom here. So 5 times 3 is going to give me 15, and 6 times 3 is 18, so that's going to be 15/18. So now when I compare these two, I can look at 15/18 and go, oh yeah, 15/18, 15 is more than 14. Pretty simple now. So all I have to do is look at that original fraction of 5/6, and I know that 5/6 is greater than 7/9. All right. The last one is just like the one we did on the previous page, and I kind of went through that with you, but I just wanted to show you something that can happen as you're working through your multiples. You'll notice down here at the bottom, when I look at my first three multiples for 5 and 7, there is no common number on that list. Sometimes you've got to extend that number out. So I had to extend it out 4 places until I found a common denominator. Okay, and then I found 35 for both of those, and just like on the first page, we had 28/35 and 25/35. I can go back and look at that original one, and I know right now that 4/5 is bigger than 5/7 or greater than 5/7. All right. So now let's do another method, and that is to use the product of the denominators with the common denominator. And this, by the way, this will always work, always for the rest of your life. You can always just multiply these out if that's an easy technique for you. Any of these strategies will work. You just got to pick the one you like the best. So, looking at the first two denominators, I've got 4 and 8, so 4 times 8 is 32. So I'm going to make both of these have a common denominator of 32. So I look at 3/4, I've got to multiply the numerator and denominator by the denominator of the other fraction, 8. So that's going to give me a total of 24/32. All right. I'm going to look at making 5/8 into 30 and to make 8 into 32, I just multiply by 4. That gives me 20/32. Okay, so when I compare 24/32 to 20/32, I can see that 24 is more. And just like we did on the last time, we just got to know what our original fraction was. In that case, that's 3/4 like you see here. So in the original equation, 3/4 is greater than 5/8. So let's take a look at the next one. 9 times 6, which is 54. So now we're going to make both of these into 54ths. So we're going to use multiplication so that we can get a common denominator of 54. We multiply the numerator and denominator by 6 here. We're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 9 in the next one. So when we compare 42/54 to 45/54, we can see that 45 is the greater of the two fractions. So we go back again to that original numbers that were up here, and you can see 45/54 is equivalent to 5/6. So 5/6 is your greater fraction here. And 5/7, which is, again, we've done this one a couple times already, so this should look very familiar to you. So when we compare these, again, we're going to be looking at that 28/35 as we've looked at on the previous 2 slides. All right. Now let's talk about some special cases. So I've got 5/8 and 2/5. Well, a method we can do that is we can use that to compare the fraction to 1/2 to see which is greater. This is very similar to what we talked about when we were in class, and we talked about using that when we were comparing fractions game. Okay, that was one of the examples I went over, was comparing it to 1/2. So how does the fraction 5/8 compare to 1/2? Well, 4/8 equals 1/2, and since 5/8 is greater than 4/8, we know that 4/8 has to be greater. 5/8 has to be greater than 1/2. Okay. Is 2/5 greater or less than 1/2? Well, 2/5 is less than 1/2 because 2 is less than half of 5. Half of 5 would be 2.5, so 2 is less than that, which means that when I compare these two fractions, 5/8 is going to be greater than 2/5 because one is more than half, one is less than half. All right, let's look at another one when we're comparing. This works really well when we're going to compare fractions where they're each only one away from the whole number 1. Okay, so I got 1/6 away, 1/7 away. Okay, so we're going to compare that fraction to the benchmark 1. That means 1 whole. Okay, so let's look at a couple number lines. Okay, 5/6 is 1/6 away from 1. Make sense? You can see the bracket right there. 6/7 is 1/7 away from 1. All right, because 1/7 is less than 1/6. Okay, it takes up a smaller amount. all right? And you can see that on the number line right here. This section here is smaller than this section here, so it's closer to 1 because it takes up less space, all right? And again, this works really well when you're comparing fractions that are 1, where the numerator is 1 away from 1 whole. So therefore, 6/7 is going to be greater than 5/6. All right, here are your practice problems for today, and you can use any method you'd like. I don't care, it's totally up to you, all right? You can see the symbols greater than, less than, or equal. Those are the normal ones you're going to see in your math book, so I just put them up there for you. I want you to write down the 3 sets of fractions that are there with the space in between, and then I want you to put the appropriate symbol. Now, if you have questions about this when we get together in our groups tomorrow, you just need to say, I didn't understand this, or there was something I needed more help with, all right? And I'll be more than happy to go through that with you. All right, see you soon.